I'd like to thank the praise team. Good to see all of y'all today. That song, The Good Old Gospel Ship, when Gil gets on that keyboard, as Bruce Templeton would say, if that doesn't light your fire, your wood's wet. That was pretty good. I really enjoyed that. If you'll notice the title, I don't know if I can get away from this or not, if I'm on or not. On? That's kind of misleading because it says Paul's second missionary journey. Actually, it's not going to be Paul's second missionary journey, or we might be here till the next homecoming. Might take away, and there's no food, so. And we're going to actually going to do about half of Paul's second missionary journey, and I just want to start by saying just a couple of things. Our preacher is away, and I'll just say we're very fortunate to have Kyle here, because he is a wonderful pulpit preacher, and I can't do his imitation. And if y'all know me, I've been in high schools all my career, and I'm a teacher, not a preacher. So today I'm just going to have to teach, and that's just the way it is. My favorite subject when I was in high school and college too, all of my good grades were in history. They weren't in agriculture or science. I always said science and agriculture was my occupation, history was my love, and that's kind of how it went there. So we're going to have what amounts to a history lesson today in part. The book of Acts is actually the only book of history that is in the New Testament. The Old Testament, and sometime I want to get into that pretty heavy, but I'll probably do that in my Sunday school class because the Old Testament is full of history books. You got 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Judges, Joshua, all these great things. And I almost did a talk today. I won't call it a sermon. I almost did a talk today on the sons of David, the sons of King David. I think that's pretty interesting something, how he was a great leader, but he wasn't such a great leader in his own family, but it makes a good story. But today, let's stay focused on what we're doing. We're going on Paul's second missionary journey. I've got a little map for you. Can we get the lights down a little bit? You can freeze that there for just a second. You've got the Mediterranean Sea on the left. Jerusalem is just out of sight down here on the bottom on the right. And I know there's lines going everywhere. Paul actually had 3 missionary journeys. You say, well, why don't you do the first? Why are you doing the second one? Because my Sunday school class already sat through the first one for a couple of weeks. We're going to go to the second one, but I do want to give a little background on the first one in a moment. All right, let her roll for a little bit. Paul is going to leave from this place called Antioch. Just freeze it there just for a second. Antioch actually was a very wealthy church in the early history of the church. They were so wealthy, in fact, that they actually had a collection of money. They passed the bucket, and they actually sent money to the church. It was in Jerusalem. So Antioch was a big deal. Antioch is the church that sponsored Paul on all 3 of his missionary journeys. They payrolled it, so to speak. And that was a very important congregation there in Antioch. And just like there's a Martinsville, Virginia, because I went coon hunting out there, there's also a Martinsville, Indiana. So you got a couple of Martinsvilles. You've also got a couple of Antiochs. If you'll notice up here in the left-hand corner, there's a little one up there called Antioch in Indiana. Well, Pisidia. It's a different Antioch, but that's going to be the jump-off point for all of these missionary journeys. All right, go let it roll a little bit. That's good enough. Woo. Tarsus, the second missionary journey. Paul is going to leave Antioch, and today, what I want to get across today is the who, what, when, where, how. How did all this second missionary journey take place? The where Paul is going, he's going to go on, they're going back to places that they visited on the first missionary journey, but he's going by his hometown first. He's going from Antioch to Tarsus. Fill in the blank. Paul of Tarsus. That's where he's from. That's his hometown. It was actually a free city, and in the Roman world, that meant that they wouldn't station any Roman legionaries there. There weren't going to be any soldiers there. And you know, if you know anything about history of the American Revolution, that was a big thing that we had against the crown and the king, is because they would put soldiers into private homes, and who has to take care of them? The people in the private home. So you had to share your bacon and eggs, so to speak. But that didn't happen in Tarsus. In Tarsus, it was a free city where you didn't have any of that going on. He left Tarsus. This is Paul. This is a good place to stop, actually. He's going back to Derbe, Lystra, and Iconium. These are three cities there in, I guess it would be eastern side of Turkey, Asia Minor they call it. It's amazing he would go back to Lystra. He healed a man there once. Couldn't walk, hadn't been able to walk for years. He healed a man, and the people were so appreciative to him, they stoned him. If you want to go back and read that story, that's in the first missionary journey. You can come to my Sunday school class, and when we do a rerun, I'll tell you all about it. But he actually got stoned there. They drug him outside of the city and left him there for dead. Paul's traveling companion on the first missionary journey was a man named Barnabas. When it got dark, Barnabas and some more men came back looking for Paul outside of Lystra. He was laying outside, and they hadn't killed him. He got him up, and if it was me, I wouldn't be in a big hurry to go back to Lystra. But he did. Why did he do that? Because they had set up, not Tarsus, that's where he's from, Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, Pisidian Antioch up here at the top. They had set up churches at all these places. But they had left those places. And Paul wanted to go back to those places, and so that's why you have the second missionary journey. He's going back. He leaves Lystra, Iconium. He goes up to Antioch in Pisidia. And here's where it changes. You see this line that goes north? Paul didn't go up there last time. He came out to Derbe, Iconium, Lystra, and went back. He had like a small circle. This second missionary journey is a big hike. He didn't go to Greensboro and turn around. He went to Miami by way of San Antonio, and there you go. He's got a big trip. All right, let this map roll a little bit further. There you go. Whoa, right there. That's good. Do you see how it goes up and it kind of meanders? Well, you can read this in the scriptures I don't have. Paul didn't know exactly where to go. You say, well, he's the apostle. How does he not know where to go? He's being led by the Spirit. He didn't know where to go. He says, I think I'll go north. And a spirit says, you don't need to go north. I think I'll go south down towards Sardis, and Ephesus is out of sight there. No, you don't need to go that way either. So he kind of meanders across the top, and he gets to a place called Troas. That's within 20 miles of the city of Troy. You're familiar with the story of the Trojan horse. Well, that in Greek, it wasn't all mythology, actually. But Troy and Troas, while he's there, Paul has a vision. And the vision says he saw a man from Macedonia. And the man from Macedonia said, come over here and help us. So isn't it interesting? He could have went east into Asia, north up, well, he goes across the Aegean Sea into a place called Philippi. You see up at the top, it's got Philippi. And that's where I'm stopping with the message today. I just wanted you to see a map to see where we're going. Philippi, once he crosses the Aegean Sea there, Samothrace and Thasos and Neil, that looks like ice cream, but anyway, he gets up to Philippi. Once he gets there, he's in Europe. He's in Europe. And as we look around, I would say a lot of our ancestors here come from Europe. Either Scotland, Ireland, France, Germany, Scandinavia, these places. And isn't it interesting that the gospel went there? I thank God the gospel went there. It didn't go, it could have went to China just as easy, but the Spirit took him into Macedonia, into a place called Philippi. All right, that's my show and tell. Maybe that'll help you know kind of what we've got going on here. All right, the who. Let's talk about who. The Apostle Paul, of course, is the first who because it's called Whose Journeys, Paul's missionary journey. And this is what one commentator had to say about Paul. He was the one man, more than any other, who established Christianity in the main centers of the then known world. And he actually altered the course of history. If you think about it, or maybe you don't think about it, Paul wrote over 2/3 of the New Testament. He wrote 13 of the books in the New Testament. To the people in the church in Rome, he wrote Romans. To the church in Galatia, he wrote Galatians. To the church in Ephesus, he wrote Ephesians. To the church in Colossae, he wrote Colossians. To the people in Philippi. And Philippi, by the way, where we're stopping today, that was considered to be about his favorite, most faithful church. On these journeys he went to, they would actually send him money on the road. They were like wiring money to him because Paul didn't exactly know where he's going because he's waiting for visions to tell him where to go. The Philippian church, who he wrote letters to, was one of his favorites. He also wrote letters to the church at Thessalonica, which is Thessalonians. He wrote private letters. He wrote letters to Timothy. He wrote letters to Titus. He wrote letters to Philemon. And he also wrote letters to a group of people just known simply as the Hebrews. And not only did he write those to people that lived in that day, he wrote it to people who live today. In fact, his conclusion for example, in the conclusion of his first letter to the Thessalonian church, he commands this. And listen to what he said. I charge you before the Lord to have this letter. What letter? The letter he wrote to the Thessalonians. I charge you to have this letter read to all the brothers. And brothers, we are the brothers. We're still the brothers. Not only was this message for first century churches, it's also for 21st century churches. So that's the who we've got going on here. But there's more than one who. On this first missionary journey, Paul took Barnabas with him. And I've kind of showed you where he went. They went to Cyprus first. You probably can't back this up. We can see the top of Cyprus. Cyprus is off the coast. I tell you what, it's good to have good AV people. Righto. Yeah, you're getting there. There we go. There we go. See Cyprus in purple right here? The first missionary journey, Paul and Barnabas. Now, Barnabas is an interesting somebody. Barnabas is about the most easygoing fellow you can imagine. He's big-hearted. And what is the background of Paul when he was Saul? He's one of these people that switches their names. You know, it kind of confuses us sometimes, but he was Saul. He was actually at a very young age, he was on the Sanhedrin Council. And you say, what does that mean? He was on the Supreme Court of Israel when he was about 30. I mean, you couldn't get on it till you were 30, and he went on when he was about 31. He had been taught by Gamaliel. He was the top Jewish authority in Jerusalem. He said, I studied at the feet of Gamaliel. There he was, but he was persecuting the church and determined to stamp out the church. And I think if there was one human being that could have stamped out and destroyed the early... I think if Paul had been given the opportunity when he was Saul, I think he would have done it. I think he could have done it. You talk about somebody that was, what do you call it? What's my word? Somebody that's, come on, y'all got to help me up here. What's that? Yeah. He was that dedicated. He was a zealot. Yes, he was zealous for his job. He was going to destroy the church. But on the road to Damascus, a bright light stops him. Ananias comes to him because the Lord told Ananias to go. He goes to him, and after 3 days of blindness, he touches Paul. It said something like scales fell off his eyes. Suddenly, Paul can see again, and he turns around. He does a complete I was going to say 360, but then he's the same way. He does a 180. He does a 180. He was going north, and like all good people do, he turns south. That's the way you should do. So he done a turnaround, but people in Jerusalem in the early church remembered when he was Saul, and they didn't trust him. So he wanted to go see the apostles in Jerusalem, but somebody had to introduce him because they couldn't. They knew all about his background. And you know how we do people. We'll say, yeah, I can forgive him, but what? But I'll not forget. Well, these people weren't forgetting. And who does he have introduce him to the church, to the apostles in Jerusalem? This man named Barnabas. Barnabas puts his arm around him and says, y'all have got Paul all wrong. He's a changed man. And they really didn't believe him too much. They're kind of skeptical, I guess you'd say. But when Barnabas leaves with Paul, they go from Jerusalem. They met the apostles. He went back up to Antioch. And then they start this first missionary journey. The reason that on the first journey, the reason they go to Cyprus, that's where Barnabas is from. He's from Cyprus, and he probably goes, hey, Paul, we can go stop over there. We've got a place to stay for a night or two. So he goes to Cyprus, then he goes up to that yellow place, Pamphylia, and then he goes to the places I've talked about. Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, then he'd turn around and come back. But one thing you should know, they weren't alone. They had somebody named Mark with them. Well, we don't know why. About halfway through the journey, Mark went home. And Barnabas is the easygoing guy that he is. He says, well, Mark just left us. I think Paul would have had more things to say. He would say something like, yeah, Mark abandoned us. Mark quit us. And so on the second missionary journey, Paul says to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the churches that we went to before. And Barnabas goes, that's a great idea. I'll go get Mark, and we'll all three go. And there was silence. Paul goes, don't think you need to get Mark. Oh, yeah, Barnabas talking. Yeah, Mark, he'll be all right this time. Paul says, I really don't think he should go. No, Paul, Barnabas talking again. Let's take him. He's a good fellow. He's grown up a whole lot. And Paul finally goes, he ain't going. And Barnabas kind of out of character for Barnabas because he's an easygoing guy. He can be like we can sometimes. He pushes back against the wall and do what? He gets a little hard-headed too. And Barnabas goes, I tell you what, he is going. Paul's going, well, he's not going with me. Barnabas goes, well, I don't care if he goes with you or not. He's going with me. And in a huff, Barnabas takes Mark, and they sail to Cyprus, back the way the first missionary journey went. And Barnabas sailed right off the pages of the Bible. Never hear from him again, but who do we hear from again? Mark. He wrote the Gospel of Mark. And if you go into the New Testament further along, Paul is reconciled with Mark, and at one point he says, bring Mark, I find him valuable. But at this time, he didn't think Paul, I think he thought Mark was just a big chicken and a quitter. If you're into sports, who don't you want on your team? You don't want quitters and you don't want chickens. So Paul says, well, you go ahead and take him. I'm taking somebody else. So Paul gets a man that came from the Jerusalem church up to Antioch named Silas. But good things happened because of that. Because instead of one missionary delegation, you've got what? Two. You've got Barnabas, who knew what he was doing. He was a great guy. You've got Barnabas and Mark going to Cyprus, and you've got Paul and a man named Silas going on this next missionary journey. Now, they're going to get up to, and at this point, I probably ought to refer to my notes because I've just been stumbling and rumbling and rambling up here. Let me see if I've got here. Oh, what was my, you can click off on the map because that's done what it needed to do. And it would help if I got into the right book. All right, I know I had chapter 16, but I'm going to start here at 1. Let me give you a little background. Paul came to Derbe and then Lystra, where he got stoned. But at Lystra, this is where, and I'm reading here, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was a believer, but whose father was a Greek, it said the brothers of Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Of who? Timothy. The duo, Paul and Silas, now is a trio because he picks up Timothy, and Timothy is going to go with them the rest of the journey. Well, what do? Verse 4. As they, this is Timothy and Paul and Silas, as they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders for the people to obey. So the churches were strengthened in faith and grew daily in number. And that's why they went back on that reroute anyway. They were strengthening churches, letting them know, we haven't forgot about you. Let's bring it back to today for us. When somebody becomes a Christian and they're baptized, and we say, glory to God, He's in the kingdom, and He is, you don't just abandon them. You have to nurture them. Somebody says, well, does a new Christian have to believe in the virgin birth? Does a new Christian have to know this? Does a new Christian have to know that? I don't think they have to know any of this. They just have to know that they're sinners and they're going to come to Christ. And after they become a Christian, then they can learn about what I just said. They'll learn that Jesus was born of a virgin, and they'll agree with it. But it's an educational process. Being a Christian is like a plant growing. Well, let me tell you how not to garden. You plant your garden. You let the seeds come up. You hoe the weeds around it, and then you go on vacation for 6 weeks and come back and see how the corn crop is. Our corn crop, you couldn't hardly see it for the Johnson grass. I mean, you got to nurture it, and Christians are kind of this same way. So Paul and Silas and Timothy, they're going back to these churches at Lystra, Iconium, Pisidian Antioch, and they're checking out these new, they're seeing how those churches went that they set up. Let's go to verse 6. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region, and having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, that's to the north, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them. So they passed by and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. After Paul had seen the vision, it says, we got ready to leave at once and go for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. All of a sudden, it was not they went here and they went there. It's we're going here. And where did the we come? Who wrote the book of Acts? Pop quiz. Luke. Luke is a doctor, and from this point on, you've got Paul and his three musketeers. It's Silas, Timothy, and Luke. It's going to be 4 of them going across to Macedonia. All right, let's go ahead and I think I'm on verse 11 here. Oh my goodness, we've got to where we're supposed to be. Let's read for a little bit. From Troy, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and the next day Neapolis. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of the district of Macedonia. Let's stop there for just a second. Philippi is a Roman colony. Back to Tarsus, that was a free city. A Roman colony is different. Roman colony, if you were born there, you were, in the United States, if you're born in the United States, you're considered to be a citizen. You're born in Philippi, you're a Roman citizen. And you got to remember, this was back, and I'll get to this a little bit later. This was back in the day when 50%, maybe 60% of the population in the Roman Empire were slaves. How many were citizens? Maybe 15%. 15 people out of 100. And so that's where they're at. They're in, Paul, in this second missionary journey, he's in downtown Philippi, the capital of the district of Macedonia. It's in Greece. Verse 13. On the Sabbath, here we go again with the 4 of them. We went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. Okay, in Philippi, a Roman city, there is no synagogue. They probably got a temple to Jupiter there. They probably got all these other idols there. There's no synagogue, and every time Paul went into a city, he went to the synagogue. Scripture says the gospel is first to the Jew, and then what? Then to the Gentile. He would always go to the synagogue to the Jews first, but he can't do that in Philippi because there's no synagogue. They went to the river. On the Sabbath, we went to the river to find a place to pray. Every time I go to the river, I got my line and sinker with me. So it says, we sat down and began to speak to the women who were gathered there. And here we're introduced to one of the most fascinating individuals. She was centuries ahead of her time. It's a lady named Lydia. I like her immediately because I can say her name. Her name is Lydia. And what does it say about Lydia? It says, one of those listening to Paul talk, because he kind of interrupted the prayer group, it was Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who was a worshiper of God. Let's stop there and think about that for a second. Have you ever heard the name Thyatira? In the book of Revelation, Jesus writes a letter to the church at Thyatira, and it's up in central Turkey, a little bit more to the east, I guess you'd call it. But it was a city there. That's where this lady Lydia is from. She's from Turkey, but where's she at? She's in Europe. She's in a different country. She's over in Philippi. What does she deal in? Purple cloth. Only royalty, only Roman royalty at that time wore purple. It was just like a badge almost. So she moved in very wealthy circles. Now she's dealing in designer clothes, not blue jean denim. Yeah, so she's a very influential person, and we don't hear anything about Mr. Lydia. I don't know what he's doing, watching the Super Bowl and eating popcorn. I don't know. He's not at the prayer meeting, evidently. A lot of households, either one spouse or the other are kind of in charge of the spiritual things. And in the Bible, it's the man is supposed to be the head of the house, but thank God there's women that'll step up when you have to. Thank you, ladies, very much. All right, so he's talking to this lady, and it says while she's listening to Paul, I'm at the last part of verse 14, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. What did Paul always preach? He always preached an Easter sermon. He preached Christ crucified and resurrected. And it says that she responded to his message. The next verse, when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. And I'll stop right there for a second. How many times did she hear the invitation given? Once. All through the book of Acts has several examples. The Cornelius, the centurion that Peter went to visit, and how he responded with Peter's first message. What about the Ethiopian eunuch? Ethiopian eunuch, you've got, who's riding with him? Philip's riding with him, another Philip. And he tells him the gospel, the Easter story. And the eunuch says, well, here's water. Why can't I be baptized? Heard it one time, did what? Baptized. What does Lydia do here? Heard it once, baptized. It's just amazing that this is what's going on. And then she says, then she invited us to her home. And listen to this. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And that was a loaded question. She knows that Paul is a Jew. What do Jews not do? Not only do they not associate or talk to Gentiles, you've all heard the story of the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. Not only did Jews not associate with them, they didn't visit them, and they certainly didn't go in the house with them. In fact, when Peter went to Cornelius, he says, you know, I'm a Jew, I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm coming in anyway. That wasn't very fuzzy and warm, was it? But that's what he told them. And here, Lydia says, if I'm truly a believer, come and stay at my house. And Paul passed his test, if that's what it was, because Luke writes, and she persuaded us. I bet she was a good cook too. So that's where they ended up going. Now, there's a little break in the chapter right here. And let's look at verse 16. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, that's going back down to the river. This is Luke writing, and it's Paul and Silas and Timothy, and there they go. We were met by a slave girl who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a lot of money for her owners by fortune telling. We'll stop right there for a second. What kind of spirit was this? I don't know if you've read your Bible much. The Bible has bad things to say about divination, predicting the future. They'd have a bad, they would have the Bible has a hard time with things like crystal balls, palm reading, tarot cards, soothsaying, these things, horoscopes. These things are things that are condemned in Scripture. And this lady this girl is earning a lot of money by telling fortunes. And are the fortunes true? People, they're not true, but people usually, have you heard this expression? People hear what they want to hear. Yeah, so she's making a lot of money for these folks, and it says, I like verse 18, she kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so troubled, he turned around and said to the spirit, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her. At that moment, the spirit left the girl. Verse 19, when the owners of the slave girl realized their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. And I'm like, when they drove that spirit out, why could they not make any more money? She was a soothsayer. She was predicted the future. When the spirit came out, this is not scriptural. This is Darrell Holland's interpretation. I'll bet when the spirit came out of her, I bet she couldn't talk. She's just smiling. And her owner comes up and says, hey, this person here wants their horoscope read or something. And she goes, so they get really mad because if you hit somebody in the pocketbook, they get really mad. And these people got really mad and they drugged Paul and Silas in front of the authorities. And not only that, look at verse 22, or if you're listening, just listen along. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas. I guess this is all the boys and girls that wanted their horoscope read. They all attacked them. It says the magistrates ordered them stripped, beaten. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison. The jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. On receiving these orders, the jailer put them in the inner cell, fastened their feet in stocks. And at this time, you would not catch me singing. I might be singing the blues. But look at verse 25. About midnight, I guess because they couldn't sleep because they got beat up, Paul and Silas were praying, singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. All at once, the prison doors flew open. Everybody's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought that the prisoners had escaped. If you were a jailer, you're responsible for the prisoners. And if your prisoner escapes, they don't just kill you, you're probably crucified. And they don't just do it to you. They kill your family, they burn your house, and your name is like blotted out. So when this jailer sees that the earthquake has opened the doors, he's going to do it quick. He's not going to go through all this. He's probably thinking maybe they'll spare my family. I don't know, that's not scriptural either. But it does say when he got ready to kill himself, but Paul shouted, verse 28, don't harm yourself, we're all here. The jailer couldn't believe it. He said the jailer called for lights. He rushed in. He fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He brought them out and he asked them, men, what must I do to be saved? Do you think he was scared to death or not? He was facing eternity, knew that he was a lost person when he got ready to put the sword to do the deed. And he says, what must I do to be saved? And they replied, this is Paul and Silas, believe in the Lord, and you will be saved, you and your household. Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him. They spoke Jesus, crucified, resurrected. And when that happened, it says, at that hour of the night, the jailer took them, washed their wounds. He did that first, but what did he do next? Then immediately, he and all his family were baptized. This is another example, somebody hearing the gospel one time and they do something about it. And we know people, and you probably know people. In fact, we are people sometimes. How many revival services, how many sermons have we listened to? And we do I'll do it one day. These are examples of people that didn't do that. They did it when? They did it right then. And I'm talking about they came to Christ right then. They confessed their sins. They were baptized and became believers. When daylight came, the story's not through here. This is a good part. When daylight came, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with this order. Release those men. The jailer told Paul, the magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. I hope your wounds aren't too bad. Hope you like breakfast, pancakes and everything. Now you can leave, go in peace. And Paul's dropping a bomb on them right here. He says, no, the magistrators beat us publicly without trial and threw us in prison, even though we are Roman citizens. You said, well, what difference does that make? And Paul continues, no, now they want to get rid of us quietly. I think Paul had a little horse pasturinian in him. He's going, if they want us to go quietly, you tell them to come here and take us themselves. And to tell you what's going on there, let me see where my other little note was here. I've got all my notes behind me. You'll have to forgive me. Well, I'll just tell you what happened. There's another instance over in the 20 chapters. We're in chapter 16. Oh, good map. We're in chapter 16 of Acts. If you go over to about 22, Paul is getting ready to be beaten again. And while they stretch him out to beat him again, Paul says this over his shoulder. Is it legal to flog or beat a Roman citizen without a trial? And everybody backs up. And they go, you're a Roman citizen? The centurion that was in charge of the what he had to do, beat him. He went back and told his commander. He said, do you know this guy's a Roman citizen? That was a big deal back in the day. And so the commander goes out there and says, is it true you're a Roman citizen? The penalty for lying about being a Roman citizen wasn't flogging. The penalty for lying about it was death. And there was kind of a short list of all the towns and how many Roman citizens were there, because not many people were citizens. They checked it out. He's a Roman citizen. And the commander goes, you are a Roman citizen. And he goes, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship because you could buy it if you were. And Paul goes, I didn't buy mine. I was born a citizen. And it's like buying citizenships, natural citizenships, and then the Caesar, I guess. So he said, oh my goodness, because what was the penalty for doing this if they hadn't been tried? Whatever they did to you as a Roman citizen, they would have done to them. And it wasn't just the commander who would have been guilty. It would have been the commander, it would have been the jailer, it would have been all the magistrates. If Paul and Silas, because Silas was a Roman citizen too, had they pressed charges, it would have been a big deal. And all of a sudden, these people get scared. It says the soldiers, when they released Paul, went away. It kind of reminds me if y'all have ever watched any of the old Gomer Pyle things where in their barracks. I think all the soldiers went in the barracks and quietly shut the door. Because anybody associated with that would have been punished. Now my question is, why did Paul not tell the jailer that he was a Roman citizen? Because he was a Roman citizen then too. And my way of thinking, not scriptural, just what I'm thinking, had the jailer not got to the point where he got, he would not have accepted Christ. So Silas is maybe elbowing him going, hey, tell them we're Roman citizens. Paul's going, just shut up. So they do. And it's just a little different thing that happened here in the 16th chapter of Acts. So let's go to verse 37 here. Paul said to the officers, you beat us publicly without trial, even though we're Roman citizens, threw us into prison. Now you want to get rid of us quietly? No. Let them come themselves and escort us out. The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, it says they were alarmed. That's probably putting it mildly. They were just shocked. Then they came to appease them and escorted them from prison, requesting them to leave the city. After Paul and Silas came out of prison, this is a good place to end this. They went to Lydia's house. How about that? Because she's still there. And how do you think that made the people of that community view Lydia? Oh, she's entertaining Roman citizens. She must be really important. And and the last phrase there, it's going to do what I'm going to do. It says, the last three words, verse 40 says, and then they left. Where did they go? Well, they left Philippi and they go to Thessalonica